Tech-2 production. So unsurprisingly, this is the process for creating the Tech-2 modules, rigs and ships. It is fairly similar to Tech-1 industry in terms of mechanics, which we can go on to in the next few slides as well. The main differences are that Tech-2 industry requires robotic assembly modules, which in the game are abbreviated to R.A.M. And with the exception of rigs, everything requires morphite, which is a rare mineral refined from bauxite, which is what you can only find, an ore mined from asteroids you can only find in either null space or wormhole space. For ships and modules, they do require a Tech-1 version of the item as one of the raw materials. They also require planetary interaction and what are called construction components, which we'll come on to as well. Tech-2 ammo is slightly different. It doesn't require any Tech-1 versions, but otherwise needs the same items as the modules and ships. Tech-2 rigs is quite different to the other modules and ships. This is made entirely from salvage materials. So if you're into exploration, then if you get the really valuable items like intact armor plates, this is why they're valuable. It's for Tech-2 rigs. And those kind of items are particularly valuable because they make Tech-2 armor rigs, for example, and those are good for PvP and so on in terms of the demand for those items. So you don't actually require the Tech-1 variants for Tech-2 rigs, so it's something people can tend to specialize in. And again, just remember that not every Tech-1 item has a Tech-2 variant. Slide number 4, this is around the skills required for Tech-2 industry. So you will need a minimum of Industry 5, Science 5, which you then need for all the advanced science skills. And then it really depends on what you go on to make. So I've listed 2 examples here. So if you want to get into Qadari ships, like a Hawk, which is a Qadari assault frigate, then you need to go down the avenue of advanced small ship construction. And that requires mechanical engineering and Qadari starship engineering. But if you want to go down the rigs, then you need different skills for that. You need nanite engineering, hydromagnetic physics, and particularly rigs, which is a little bit strange. You do need to skill yourself up in actually fitting armor rigs to make those Tech-2 items. And as you can see in my example, armor rigging itself needs jury rigging to 3 as well. But what you will find with all the different items is you will need one set of skills or the other. When you look at the ship building, for example, then obviously Qadari only lets you build Qadari ships, so you would need to cross-skill into Galente, Amar, etc. to make all the different ships that you can, if that's what you want to do. But obviously you can decide to specialize if that's your thing. In terms of improving those skills, again, why would you do that? Then, for example, skilling those, particularly advanced small ship construction, for example, that would decrease your manufacturing times, which is always useful for industrialists. And if you do want to self-supply components, which is the major kind of margin element of Tech-2 industry, then you will need to skill up those advanced technology skills to at least 3 to make those items. We'll come on to what we mean by the components in a couple of slides' time. A bit like when you fly larger ships, you also need to have multiple skills in the kind of lower down skills, for example. So if you want to fly a battleship, you will need frigate, cruiser, and battlecruiser skills, for example, and the same applies with building them. So if you need to make Tech-2, if you want to go on to make Tech-2 larger ships, then you're going to need multiple levels of the smaller ship. So for example, large ship construction needs small ship construction level 3, for example. And the basic industry skills: mass production, advanced mass production, and supply chain management. So those are, if you're into Tech-1 industry, you should probably have multiple levels of those already. Mass production and advanced mass production allow you to do multiple runs of industry jobs. Most industrialists will have those maxed out to 5 each. And supply chain management, that's the one that lets you remotely start off those jobs. So it's quite annoying to have to go into your station and start off those jobs while you're trying to do other stuff. So I always recommend people do supply chain management just as a convenience thing rather than anything else. So what do you need to do to actually make the items for Tech-2? So again, NPC stations are perfectly capable of Tech-2 industry. You will need, again, to find an appropriate station. Not all of them will provide industry services, but a lot of them do. Again, with player-owned starbases still around in the game, you can use those to make Tech-2 items. You will need certain arrays. There's numerous arrays depending on what you want to make. The example I've used here is called Advanced Small Ship Construction Array, which would let you make Tech-2 frigates and destroyers. In terms of uni counters are not allowed to own their own player-owned structures, so you could do that on alt. If you have alt corps or alt counters, they can own a pos and put one up, but they wouldn't allow your uni counter to use that pos. It's just not a mechanic that's allowed. So if your uni counter is the actual industry list, then really a pos is not the way to go. However, the advantage of the engineering complex is that they can be enabled to either general public or to specific counters or specific corps. So commonly what we're seeing now is all corporations putting up the engineering complexes and allowing other counters to use them. So an alternative way for a uni counter to pursue industry is to have an alt owning the complex and giving rights to the uni counter to use it. So once you've got the structure, whatever structure you're going to use, you obviously need the blueprint copy of the Tech-2 item. I'm going to assume you're not going to have an original. And also the input materials. As with any industry, then there is ISK to pay for the industry job, and that again depends on things like the system cost index and so on, which we'll come on to in a second. So in terms of what's best and where is best to make the items, so the advantage of NPC stations is obviously you and your assets are safe inside that station, nothing can get blown up. There's quite a bad tax rate on NPC stations though, which is the downside to those. So it will be more expensive for you to do industry within an NPC station than it would be in a different type of complex or structure. But with these as a POS or the engineering complexes, if you own the POS yourself, then you need to fuel it. So that costs you ISK to run the POS. And on an engineering complex, if you don't own the complex, then the tax rate is basically set by the player who owns it, which may not be you. So you do need to look at what rates are competitive in your local area. Uni counters probably are going to have alt corps or other uni counters with alt corps who own engineering complexes near you, and they potentially offer preferential rates. So do check in your campus if anyone owns one is willing to or has let the uni have some reduced rates to it. If your alt corp does own the engineering complex, then it's going to be similar to a POS. You're going to have to fuel it, keep it going to allow the industry to work in it. So that's going to be a kind of cost to the benefit of owning one and setting your own tax rate on your counters. So assembly arrays in POSs, the benefit of those is quite a good reduction in production time and a reduction in materials needed. So there are good margins in owning a POS and using them for industry. They do cost a fair amount to set one up though. I think it's about 100 million for a tower, and you're going to need arrays and potentially some defences as well, depending where you put it. But I would tend to shy away from investing in a POS if you don't actually own one at the moment, because, as I say, they're going to be phased out and replaced by engineering complexes which already exist. So I would tend to recommend people concentrate on how they're going to get engineering complex if that's the way they want to go. However, engineering complexes are a lot more expensive to set up. I won't go into too much, but you're probably looking at an investment of a couple of billion to put up the smallest engineering complex with the rigs and the modules, etc. by the time you've paid for that. The benefits of engineering complexes are fairly complicated in their own right. It does affect what space they're in. So the same complex in high sec will have slightly less benefits than one in low sec and one in low sec, and the benefits get higher depending on what space you're in, but obviously it's a lot more risk. In terms of the structure itself, you don't need to war deck, particularly in null or low, to blow it up. You obviously would in high sec, which is kind of what they're trying to offset with those benefits. So engineering complexes do, on a base level, offer a job duration benefit and a reduction to the system cost index. engineering complexes and their additional benefits really depend on what rigs the owners have fit onto it. If you're lucky, the owners will probably put what rigs they fit in the name of the complex to help you out, but otherwise you may have to contact them to actually find out what rigs they put in to work out what is the most efficient items to make in that complex. Now, for the system cost index, if you're doing Tech-1 industry already, you're going to be probably familiar with that concept. Effectively, it's a tax set by the local authorities in the system that you're in. So the busier the industry in a particular system, the higher that cost index will be. So it is something to consider when you're doing industry, exactly where you're going to do it. JITA, being a trade hub, which does actually have industry stations in it, has a really high system cost index. I think it was 12% when I last looked. That compares with less than 1% of a system that's out the way and not a lot happens in it. So it can affect your margins in quite a big way. I guess the people doing industry in JITA are probably a bit lazy and don't want to haul their goods to market, so they're taking the hit on the ISK to avoid having to haul goods around, I would expect.
Question about the different components that are used in Tech-2. Is it worth can afford them and fully research them? And in my case, for example,
you're breaking up bad.
Yeah, I think I get the questions, which we'll come on to in the next few slides anyway. But I think it might be better, IL, if you maybe type your questions into lecture if you've got the channel open. You're just breaking up every time about 5 seconds into your sentences. You just keep on. I'll just go on with the slide for now. So lastly on this slide is the future of industry complexes. So again, just to cover off what I've said before, the player-owned star bases, the actual POS towers, they will be kind of decentralized, and other structures will be incentivized to make players basically give them up voluntarily. So that's why I would, at this stage, not recommend buying a POS if you don't currently own one. If you do currently own one, then again, it's really up to you if you think the benefits of a POS are better than an engineering complex. It's a lot cheaper to kind of fit out and run, but for a new player without any structures at all, I would tend to recommend not to invest in a POS just because that ISK will effectively be wasted in less than a year. And again, engineering complexes, you can avoid obviously buying your own if you can find one that's got a good rate for you that's owned by someone else. You just need to be careful of potentially them getting more debt and their structure being blown up and the effect that might have on any jobs you've got on the way at the moment. There is the thing called asset safety, but if you do have an engineering complex that's blown up as you've got jobs in flight, then you lose all the materials that have gone into that job. So you do get your blueprints back in terms of the blueprint originals, etc. But it is something to be aware of for engineering complexes. So slide 6, this is a really simple version of the manufacturing process, really. I've drawn out here. So if you want to make a Tech-2 item, then if you have the minerals, you can make the Tech-1 item and the RAM. In this case, that'd be a Starship RAM. You do get moon goo to make the advanced construction components. You still need the morphite, and for ships you need some PI, which is construction blocks. And when you've got all those things together, then you can make the Tech-2 variant. So I've not labelled it, but what I've played out here is a chamber being invented and produced into a bustard. So On Armour asks about the margin of potentially the loss of the assets versus the margin, really. So I guess the best way to put this is I would not try to factor in my margins of my items the value of the structure I'm making it in, if that makes sense. Because if you do that, you're going to start increasing your price to the point where you're going to be less competitive with people who haven't. So in terms of margin, I would just purely work out on the input materials versus the cost of the item when you sell it. I wouldn't try to recoup my structure costs from individual items because that would bump up the price beyond competitiveness, but you should slowly make that back over time. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. So it is worth doing it.
Yeah, you can't really charge your customers for the risk of losing your structure, is what I would recommend at least. Purely because other people will probably not take that approach, and you have difficulty selling your items at all if you're charging a high price. Of course, people just keep on undercutting you.
So you have to do it by shipping raw moon goo. Start from scratch by.
Yeah, so I'll come on to that in a second as well. I'm just making sure I've got the questions in chat. So Savannah just asked an invention one as well, which is around the skills of the agent. So you need to basically you can use the agent finder to find the R&D agents in your local area, and if you right click on them and show information on them, they have a list of advanced science skills against them, and those are the data cores they will give you. So I hope that answers Savannah's question. So slide 7, again, this is a very just a representation of the screenshot from the Tech-2 industry process. So similar to the invention one. Once you have all the items assembled, you'll have the start button enabled, and off you go with your job. But it does show you, I guess, the kind of same process where you need your advanced components to be in the item hanger, morphite, construction blocks, Tech-1 variant, RAM, and off you go. And again, the system index will, the total cost job, the system index will dictate how much it actually costs for you to run that job. So Ayo's question, I'll kind of go on my next slide around sourcing materials and try to cover off Ayo's question at the same time. So I guess what we've established so far is you need minerals for Tech-1 variants. You need planetary interaction, so and you need PI for that. You need a structure, and you need the moon goo. So in terms of self-supplying these things, it gets quite difficult for a single player or even a small group of players to produce all the items they need to do this process. So if you think about these things one by one, if you were to self-supply these Tech-2 items from start to finish, then you need to mine standard ore yourself to get the Tech-1 variants, and you need to have your own planetary colonies set up to do the PI. If you're going to produce the moon goo yourself at the moment, then you need a POS, and that POS needs to be in a 0.3 or lower security system, and that POS needs to be equipped with the relevant moon mining materials and equipment. So that's a moon mining array, a silo to store them in, and what are called reactors to react the raw materials into what's called process materials to then react into advanced materials. And those also require reaction blueprints as well. So you can see the challenges in starting, at least if you're, for example, a high-sec character living in high-sec, how you're going to actually source your moon goo if you're going to self-supply that. So what we tend to find is most profitable moons, as in they produce more materials than it costs to run the POS, that's extracting them, already taken by someone. And they're probably going to be a member of a corp in the local area, particularly Sov, Null, and No-Sec will probably be, if not Sov Null, it'll be NPC No, but probably still kind of lived in by a certain corporation who will obviously fight for those moons. And particularly in Sov Null, it's one of the particular reasons why Sov is attacked and taken, especially for the assets it provides in the system in terms of profitable moons and resources. Interestingly, there is an item called a siphon unit, which you can set up inside someone else's POS, which basically steals a plenty of materials, which is an interesting concept. The POS defenses don't attack the siphon unit, even though it's not owned by the POS. I haven't actually tried that myself, but what's not quite clear to me is how you actually deploy one without the POS attacking you anyway. But I guess maybe low sec might be less risk of being randomly attacked by a POS. Probably in no sec, the owners probably haven't set up to attack anyone who's within range. So asks the question around the ownership. So can an owner of a POS or engineering complex steal your material if he chooses? The answer is no. So it's very much like a station. You have your own item hanger, and no one could get into that. if you set up, it is possible in Citadels, of course, to set up corporation offices, and you could share corporation hangars. So your own corpmates potentially could steal your stuff, but the owner themselves, being a different corporation, have no access to your assets held within their complex. Okay, so to cover off Ao's question, so he currently lives in NoSec.
Sovnal, but yeah, nullsec.
Yeah, Sovnal, yeah. So in your case, you want to do Tech-2 industry.
I was thinking about it, but the problem is shipping the Moongoo from HiSec.
Yeah, so what I would say is if you live in Sovnal, then I imagine your corporation is moon mining the moons in your Sov.
Yes, they're using the Moongoo for paying the alliance and sovereignty.
Okay. So I guess it depends how your corp interacts with each other, but I guess the kind of obvious thing for me, if it was me, I'd be asking if I could buy some of that Moongoo as part of the extraction process your corp is doing in your local area. That would be the simplest way to get your hands on that material, which you would need to do.
Or I can just ship raw reacted materials and start building it from.
Yeah. So the other way, which is what I do, I haven't tried to set up a POS in lower security space because I'm only I have my alts in their own alt corp, so I'm not a particularly powerful individual to go and fight other people for moons. So yes, in answer to that question, what I do is I go to market and I purchase the reacted materials. Well, I don't think anyone actually sells the raw materials. I think people wouldn't really buy raw materials and then have to take back into low sec to then react. So the market is really around the reacted materials into advanced materials. So yes, in terms of what I would suggest most people do is you work out what you can self-supply and what you need to buy from the marketplace. So the process is too complex really for any individual to, I think, realistically self-supply everything in the process. And if you did, you'd probably do nothing else in the game but do that. So yeah. So what I do, for example, is I mine for the Tech-1 items. I build those myself. I have my own PI colonies, and I go and buy the Moongoo from the market to then build my own advanced construction components. And that works for me, and I do make profit doing that. So that's what I choose to do.
In theory, pay for them by just doing some type of ratting and some H.
Yeah, so you're still breaking up a bit, but I guess it's kind of how do you pay for the Moongoo? I guess that's kind of up to you. So for example, myself, I started off mining in HiSec, so I have quite good skills in mining, so I just mined standard ore, so that built up some ISK, bought blueprints, got into industry, and now my industry kind of pays for itself by the profits I make from, I can basically buy my Moongoo from the profits of my previous sales from my industry. But yes, in terms of startup costs, you will need some way to earn that ISK to start up the industry process. Yes, and Bjorn is right there. In terms of if you're going to do station industry, for example, then you don't really need much at all in the way of startup costs. You just need a few blueprints, some data cores, encryption, and the game skills to do it. So this is a really basic example of, if you've not seen one of these before, then crystalline carbonide armor plate is an example of an advanced construction component. And if you click on that and view industry on it, you'll be able to see this needs ceramic fibers and crystalline carbonide, which are both kind of end reacted Moongoo materials, which then make the items. People do sell those made items as well, so you don't have to buy the Moongoo, and you don't have to buy the materials and the blueprints to make those items. You can actually buy the constructed carbonide armor plates direct from the market, but again, you're kind of giving someone else the margin there. So personally, I don't do that. I build the components myself and then build the items from my components. I'm kind of cutting out a middleman margin there.
Quick question with regards to the reaction materials. I see when I hover the mouse over the top portion of the menu, it says it can be harvested from moons or gas. So does it have to be moon goo, or can it also be gas clouds?
Yes, moons at the moment. I'm not that description may be anticipating the new way of doing things, but at the moment it's moon goo only from moon mining.
Oh, the changes might also affect how we can get our moon materials, since we have to.
Yeah, so I've read the moon mining blog that's just come out. I think it was this week actually. So I have covered this into this slide. So what we do know, which isn't much at the moment, CCP have announced what they're going to call drilling refineries. I think I typoed complexes here, but they're going to be called drilling refineries, and they're going to be specialized reprocessors and refineries, as they sound. So I guess what it means is I think Citadels at the moment do reprocessing, and I think by the sound of it, refineries will probably be better than Citadels at pure refining ore into minerals. The mechanics kind of been explained as the new complexes will be positioned on a moon, and you maybe, I think the change maybe kind of have several complexes over the moons, but the period they've said is around a week or more, depending on the size of the chunk of the moon you want to extract. So it's going to be a lengthy process, and when that moon chunk is ready, in terms of it's been extracted and outside the refinery, then the player who owns that refinery will be able to detonate that chunk of the moon, and that will create an asteroid belt specific to that moon chunk. So what I currently understand is anyone will be able to come along and mine that asteroid belt, but obviously if it's the security of the space will still be restricted to low and below. So I wouldn't suggest people can think they can take advantage of the new mechanic without repercussions. Obviously, people will probably be defending those asteroid belts and looking to blow up random people wanting to take advantage of their moon mining operation. What wasn't quite clear for me from the dev blog was they are talking about these asteroid belts being full of ABC, which are the rare ore minerals. It suggested that those also going to provide the moon goo raw materials as well, as how I read it, but I wasn't quite sure on that. It didn't seem quite clear, and I don't think even they are yet. So, but in some way, I think the mechanic will be the new asteroid belt formed from that detonation will provide the moon goo for Tech-2 industry. What they haven't said is when. They've just kind of done a very generic comment around they'll be ready when they're ready. So we don't know how long they're going to take. They've also announced what they're going to plan to do, but we don't know when. So as we speak today, it's carrying on with the POS mechanics for now. And I've also added here, I don't know what the yield rates will be, whether they'll be improved. I think they're going to try to balance it out as much as possible. I think they're looking to maintain the current kind of inputs into Tech-2 industry. I think they're pretty happy with that at the moment. So I don't think there'll be some vast improvement in how much moon mining will generate from the new process, but we've yet to know that as well. So Alice asks about websites which can guide to items manufactured with a good profit margin. So yes, at the back of the pack, and I will link it, there's a tool which I use called This Per Hour, which I'll link in a second. So slide number 9, this is just an example of profitability which I wanted to run through. This gives an idea of if you just turn up and buy the items you require at the marketplace, make the item and then try to sell it, and the difference between that and self-supplying some of the materials. So the prices are probably a bit out of date because I did this a few weeks ago, but the example we used here is a drone link augmenter, 10 runs. So if you were to just turn up at Jita and buy those items straight from the marketplace without buy orders, then it's going to cost you about 11 million ISK to buy all those items to produce the goods. Sorry, it's going to take 9.185 million. So sorry, I'm just making sure I read my own text right. But yeah, if you turned up to the marketplace and just bought those items straight from the market from other people's sale orders, then it's going to cost you about 9.1 million ISK. once you've made those items, if you then on your own, if you then take those items back to market and just sell them to someone who wants to buy them, then you're going to sell them at 9.6 million. But if you were going to put those items up on your own sale orders for other people to come along and buy them, if that makes sense, then you're going to make 11.1. So if you take a really short, easy route in buying and selling your materials, you're going to make a much lower margin. So the example worked out here is you're going to make 500,000 ISK if you just bought those materials straight from Juta and then sold your items immediately rather than put time on them. Then you're going to only make 500,000 ISK for 10 Tech-2 items, which is a really poor rate of return. So the key thing here is buy low, sell high. So when I do industry, I always put buy orders up for my materials. So I'm buying them from people who want to sell them to me rather than I just immediately buy them. And when I'm selling items, I always use sell orders as well. So I'm kind of playing both sides of things there, where I won't buy from people's sell orders, but I only sell using sell orders, if that makes sense. So the example we use here on how to increase the margin. So if you do make your own components, so the particle accelerator units that you use in those augmenters, you can see there, if you went to market and bought them, it cost you 3.789 million. You can reduce that cost by making them yourself, and that saves you about 1.3 million, which is about a third off that cost. You can produce your own transmitters from PI, and if you're a miner, you can mine the ore yourself to make the Tech-1 variants. So that's when you start to make the real ISK with Tech-2 industry, is when you're kind of self-supplying some of the materials, which you're especially using at cost then rather than giving people margin in what they do. So really, by the time you've done those things and self-supplied those things, then you really cut in your own costs for your input to probably around half the cost it would be to buy all those items from the marketplace. So you're increasing your margin by that rate as well. So you're kind of doubling the profit you're making by self-supplying. It does obviously take longer, but it's much more profitable to self-supply what you can, build what you can, and then make the items. Okay, so in answer to Alice's question, that tool is pretty much recognized as one of the forefront or foremost industry items or tools at the moment. It's called ISK per hour, and that's a link to the site which lets you download that tool. But it's very useful. It does, from an industry perspective, it lays out the raw materials that you need to buy to make an item. That's something you'd otherwise have to do manually by looking at each of the different components. But it also gives you an ISK per hour ratio against any item you plug into it as well. So it will tell you what's currently hot on the market and what would actually make a loss if you made it. So yeah, that's what I would use to answer that question in terms of a tool which you can use to make sure you're making something profitable at the current time. Obviously, markets will shift, but yeah, it's a good pointer, and it's quite useful time saver as well, just on what raw materials to buy to make an item, rather than spend lots of time filtering through different component blueprints to find out what you need to add up. Some other useful links I've included on the next slide. Some ones about PI. If you don't do PI at the moment, then there's some useful links on how to do PI there, which is all part and parcel of Tech-2 industry. So you will need some PI for any Tech-2 industry other than rigs. So it is worthwhile people skilling into PI as industrialists. And I've also linked the current wiki for current moon mining through POSes and the recently released refinery dev blog that's only come out this week for people to read as well. But like I say, it's up to people if they pursue the POS when we know they're going to be replaced, but that's entirely up to everyone. Okay, so I'll stick around for a while in public mumble just in case anyone thinks of anything they want to ask, but otherwise, thank you for attending, and that's the class closed. Thank you.
I have a small question. When you start jobs, do you start in large quantities or in small quantities to maximize your efficiency?
So you do get small material efficiencies from larger runs of jobs. So your Tech-2 copies will never be that large, though. The most you can get is probably about 20, I think. So it's not like you can make 100 Tech-2 ships at once. You can only make a maximum of about 10 ships, 20 modules. But yeah, if you queue 20 rather than 1, you see a slightly better material efficiency per item if you do more than 1 at a time. So yes, if you're going to make Tech-2 modules, for example, you might as well use up your BPC and make all the items rather than 1 at a time.